Good evening once again. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined this evening once again by my dear partner and friend and teacher, Rabbi Noah Kushner, and our very special guest, Rabbi Benay Lappe of Chicago. And we're delighted to have you with us this evening as we continue our exploration, our journey to explore the Judaism, the Jewish life that is awakening all around us. Benay, thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm thrilled to be here and
I'm really
really
glad.
so honored. Thank you.
We're really glad to have you. You are the head of an organization, a new institution in the community, which has gotten some wonderful attention, called Svara. So first tell us what the word Svara means and how you put an S and a V together in a syllable, and then talk to us about what this institution is and what was your vision.
Yeah. So, it appears to people that Svara is a new thing, but we've actually been around for 17 years now. We're one of those, overnight successes that really isn't an overnight success. So, Svara is a yeshiva. Um, and of course, we have a colon and something to the right of the colon. So our name is Svara colon, a traditionally radical yeshiva. And we're really re-envisioning what a yeshiva can look like, and re-envisioning or revisioning in what turns out to be a very traditional way how the tradition works. So let me first tell you what Svara means, and then I'll tell you how Svara got started, I guess. The word Svara is an Aramaic word. I didn't invent it. The rabbis of the Talmud invented it. And it means moral intuition. I suppose a more exact translation is reason. And often you'll hear it referred to as logic or reason, but it's a concept that developed over the rabbinic period from what really was initially mere logic and a reasonable sort of logical deduction that everyone would agree with, to a moral impulse or ethical insight that was understood to be equal to Torah in its authority and its ability to, even sometimes if necessary, overturn Torah to upgrade our system, to upgrade what we understand God wanted from us and what Torah really says. So as a rabbinic student, first of all, I should say that this concept was never taught to me. Ed, you were one of my teachers in rabbinical school, and I will not hold you personally responsible, but over 6 years at JTS, I was never taught this idea of Svara. And it's a very powerful idea. It's the expression of trust that the Jewish system has in people, not just rabbis, but every human being, to be able to suss out what God wants of us, tempered by and shaped by learning. So you can't be an ignoramus and say, oh, my kishkis tell me, or I feel like, and so that's right. If you are learning, involved in and steeped in the principles and values of the tradition, what your informed intuition, the way a doctor might have intuition after 10 years of learning and practice, that intuition can overturn Torah. And as a queer person who had been told all my life that what it says in the Torah, it's right there, our hands are tied, sorry, we can't make any changes, I know it hurts you, but there's nothing we can do. It turns out that that's just not true. And that pissed me off when I found out that I had been really told a lie about our central myth and how my tradition worked, that this is how it is and we can't change it, is really a tragedy, because it left me, and like a lot of people, with two choices: take it or leave it. You can either suppress your own moral intuition and accept what your tradition tells you, or you can leave it. And most people have taken that. Most Jews have opted for, I'm out of here. And when I learned Talmud and realized that it's never been that way, I realized I had something important. And I think I noticed that as a queer person reading Talmud. As a queer person reading Talmud, as someone to whom others have held up the Torah and said, but it says right here, you can't possibly, who you are is a violation. Who you are is against God and Torah. Or most compassionately, we'd love to change our system, but we can't, our hands are tied. To see the record called the Talmud of a tradition that has never made that excuse and has always been willing to even overturn Torah where necessary, and has recorded how to do so in a document that it's handed down, was really radicalizing for me. And the fact that I never learned this term until I left rabbinical school and got to Klal, which is a think tank, I think is quite stunning. And one of the things I'm out to do is to popularize this word Svara. I think every kid who goes to Hebrew school should not only be learning tzedakah and tikkun olam, they should be learning the word Svara. Because if I had known that when I was coming out, among other points in my life, it would have made a big difference. So if you want to hear how Svara happened, I got out of rabbinical school. I went to JTS. I had been a gay activist for a decade before going to rabbinical school, and went into the closet because JTS did not accept openly gay candidates. And when I got out of rabbinical school, I realized I've never really learned with my full self in the room. And so I had to create a yeshiva so that other queer folk would come in the room, and, you know, I'd get to play in the sandbox finally for real. And so on a really personal level, I started Svara to be a yeshiva where I could learn for the first time. But I also realized that there were a lot of people like me who had been kept out of really understanding how the tradition works, and that was very, very bad, not only for them, but for the tradition. And the moment when I decided, yeah, I have to start this yeshiva, it was June 23rd. I'll tell you a quick story. June 26, 2003. And I was in New York on a visit, and I was sitting on the subway, and I opened up the New York Times, and the headline read, Supreme Court overturns sodomy laws. That was the Lawrence decision. And I sat on that subway car and I started to weep, because when I came out, I only knew two things. I knew they put people like me in jail, and who I was against God and Torah. That's what I knew. And at that moment, sitting on that subway, I realized the world had just changed, because no gay kid was ever going to come out again and think they put people like me in jail. And I knew that case had gone to the Supreme Court because Lambda Legal, a gay rights legal advocacy organization, brought it to the Supreme Court. And I understood that the world had just changed because queer people went to law school. And I knew in that moment that the Jewish world was not going to change until queer people went to yeshiva as queer people. And I started Svara at that moment in my mind to be that yeshiva. And we started out as a yeshiva for queer people. And we grew and we grew and we grew to be a queer yeshiva for all people. And now with the demographic shift, all people, turns out, are largely queer people. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the studies, but you remember the 1990 National Jewish Population Study that came out with the infamous number of 52%, right? That was the intermarriage rate, which launched the Jewish world into you know, spending billions of dollars on continuity commissions and efforts, right? The new 52% is the percentage of Gen Z that identifies as queer. Okay. My daughter is 15 years old. She's a freshman in high school, and almost half of her class identifies as queer in some way. Gay, bi, trans, poly, ace, that's asexual, genderqueer, non-binary, you name it. So the queer population that we thought was kind of a niche population that our yeshiva was initially for, I have a feeling is going to be the future Jewish population. So demographically, we sort of stepped in shit by being a queer yeshiva.
I feel like you're bringing up two really profound ideas. One is bringing one's whole self to Torah study. And I want to hear, so my first question is, what characterizes that experience? You've experienced both, right? Sort of checking yourself at the door in order to study, and then really prioritizing bringing the whole self in. I want to know how that complicates the study, how it elevates the study. I want to know what it feels like to be in that room.
Yeah.
And my other question has to do with Talmud study. You talked about it as a vehicle for gaining access and power. And I'd like to hear a little more about that as well. How does that actually play out? What, how is the world taken notice? What might it look like?
Wow. Okay. So what does it feel like to be in the room? It's such a great question. And in fact, the culture of Svara is 1/4 of our secret sauce. We've, over the years, we've realized we're onto something. There is something magical and powerful. And I often call it magic because I can't quite figure out what exactly is going on here. And as we've grown and have needed to scale and train teachers and create more spaces for Svara, sort of outposts all over the world, we've had to reverse engineer what's in this magic so that we could replicate it. And we've realized there are 4 components in the secret sauce. There's the culture, and I think that's really what your question is about. What does it feel like to really be fully in the room? There's our orientation, which is, what do we really believe about this thing we're teaching about Talmud? What do we really believe about the tradition? And it turns out it matters very much. Not only that you know as a teacher what you believe or as a rabbi, but that you make that visible to people you're teaching. Our method, and we have a really unique method for bringing people into this spiritual practice of Talmud study. And a new method is necessary because for 2,000 years, this really core spiritual practice of learning has been accessible to 1% of the Jewish people. I think it's amazing and kind of miraculous that we've done as well as we have, and that can be argued, but we've done fairly well over the last 2,000 years with just 1% of our population really accessing the tools of driving the tradition. Okay, we exist to bring that access to the other 99%, and it turns out you need new methodologies to bring a really thick, complex, sophisticated system to people who are just learning their Aleph Bet. Okay, and then finally, pedagogic beliefs. So those are the 4 components, and I'll start with the culture, which is really, how does it feel? Svara's culture is queer normative, first of all, and what I think we're still fleshing out what exactly does that mean, aside from the fact that it has to mean that a majority of the people in the room identify as queer and trans? Unfortunately, I think eventually that won't need to be the case, but just like a feminist space probably can't yet in history be all men in the space with a guy in front of the room. Eventually it will, but still the space requires a majority of queer and trans folk with a queer person, a queer trans person in front of the room. And the reason queer and trans folk create a space with a particularly open, affirming, empowering, loving vibe is because queer and trans folk, along with other people like Black and brown people and people with disabilities and poor folk, people who are on the margins, those folk know something really, really important and valuable and have insights that are really essential to walk through the world as a critique on the mainstream. And they know what it's like to have the world crash for them, the way the world is supposed to be, or Torah is supposed to be, and they know how to survive it. And those people tend to hold their truths really lightly and to be really open to challenges and be open to bigger truths. And so this space feels very loving and affirming. And, you know, as I began to try to think what is our method and how can we teach it to other teachers, I went to one of my veteran students and I said to them, you know, help me think of what happens in the Beit Midrash and the steps and what are we doing? And they said to me, Benay, it's not about what you do. It's about how you look at us. So that's not about me so much. As it I think describes the love. I love every one of my students. Every teacher at Svara loves their people because we're not like serving them. They're not customers. We get to learn because they came into the room. This is a project that is about us as creators and not just for the, you know, consumers. There are no consumers. So I know I'm only barely getting at it.
No, and the only thing that I want to just highlight is what you said about the queer community and other communities could have been said in different times and maybe still could be said about the Jewish community.
Absolutely. Jewish
Right? So,
is queer. We used to be queer. We're not all that queer anymore, unfortunately. I think we've lost our edge to a great extent.
There's like a Lenny Bruce 6.0 something here, right?
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things that I have to remember as kind of an old school lesbian is, you know, I'm not the queerest thing on the block anymore. And there's always someone queerer than you. And the key is to always be open to who's not here, who needs to be, who has an insight from the leading edge of queer. That's going to help me get a bigger truth. And that's why it's really important to hold those truths lightly. So I know I'm only beginning to get it, but what I think what you're saying to me has been, I keep working on trying to articulate what is going on in this queer normative space. And by the way, I think queer normative, when history looks back on Svara, it could turn out that our contribution has had nothing to do with Talmud whatsoever. It might, at the end of the day, actually be about the essentialness of queer normative space for all spaces. Those 52% of the kids, they are not going to stay in a Jewish space that is not queer normative, right? And as soon as they see you not naming your pronouns, as soon as, they're going to look to see if you're naming what indigenous land you're coming from when you put where you're coming from in the chat. They're looking for a worldview and a set of values that goes far beyond gender and sexuality. That's what it increasingly means to be queer. And if we don't create the spaces that incorporate that sort of Svara driven set of values, it's not just that we're going to lose them. It's not that I'm in an engagement project, but we're going to lose our ability as Jews to upgrade our own tradition and create human beings who walk through the world, making the world the kind of place that we want. And then you asked me another question, but I forgot. What was it?
Oh, we have lots of questions, so don't worry about that. We have lots of questions. I have two questions in mind, but let me ask the first. It's the extension of what you just said.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna. I find myself in these conversations apologizing an awful lot for being sort of the old guy. But let me ask you an old guy question, okay? I certainly appreciate. I think I certainly appreciate. I'd like to appreciate the sweet and incredibly valuable invitation to queer Jews and non-Jews, queer people, to come into the yeshiva, to sit in front of the sacred text, to feel accepted, to feel heard. I want to understand it the other way around. What do queer eyes add to our learning of Torah? How do you learn Torah differently because of your experience as a queer person? How does that voice enrich our Jewish conversation? How we read Torah, how we read Talmud, how we read Halacha or Midrash? How does it enrich our Jewish conversation?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say that the yeshiva is open to everybody. And the straight folk who come are often blown away that they feel the way they feel at Svara, they realize they have never felt before in a mainstream space. And I think that speaks to the fact that we have a lot of dissatisfied folks, quote unquote, affiliating, sticking with what I call option one Judaism, which is, call it whatever you want, old school, status quo, legacy institutions and organizations. Those are actually not serving well many of the people who are there. Many of the people are there because the new alternatives are just beginning and they're fledgling, and they're not even on the radar screen of lots of folks. But this is the way disruptive innovation always works, that the little things grow, the new option three, as I call them, they grow, they get thicker, they get more substantial, and they start peeling off folks from the old tradition. Anyway, so queer eyes, what do queer eyes do to learning? Back in the day, there was kind of the queer 1.0 way to read text. And that was, where am I? Where's there a story here about a gay person or a lesbian? And we were so excited. I'm talking about, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. We were so excited with Ruth and Naomi and Jonathan and David. And those were like the queer stories. And it was like, oh my God, I'm here. There have been people like me before. And that was great. And that was important for its time. And that's why I call it Queer 1.0. And the Queer 2.0 read of the tradition was what happened to me when I went to JTS and I started learning Talmud. And all of a sudden, I see that this is a radical document. This is a document that, like I said before, it's telling the stories over and over and over, thousands and thousands and thousands of cases, visibilizing the overturning of Torah And not only the fact that that's been done, but the how-to of it. And as a queer person, that is very, very, very powerful. And it was impossible for me to read Talmud and not have that jump out at me. You know, I often talk about donkey stories. And, you know, as one of my teachers once taught me, if donkeys read Torah, all the donkey stories would jump out at them, right? So they would go, oh my God, there I am. Oh my God, there I am, right? The stories that people, human beings miss. The donkeys would go, oh, there I am. And that's a queer 1.0 story. That's a donkey 1.0 story. A donkey 2.0 story is those donkeys are also going to notice all the stories where someone has been burdened or used for someone else's benefit or weighted down so that someone else could be relieved. That's a 2.0 story. And queer people are very attuned to a certain experience of life, namely a profound sense of disconnect between the way the received tradition or the world tells us life is and the way our svara, our lived life experience, tells us it should be. And if we've survived as queer people, it's because we've been willing to privilege the way our lived life experience tells us the world should be, and said, no, they're wrong. And actually we're right. And we're willing to, you know, walk through the world as queer people. And when you have that experience and you read Talmud, you see that the rabbis were very, very queer, not in their gender and sexuality, although they might have been, I don't know, but in their experience of noticing the inadequacy here, there of their received tradition, and their willingness to not only prioritize their svara, but to invent the concept of svara, or to name it and say, this is equal to Torah. And that I think that's we've lost the ability to read and notice that dynamic of radical change, for all sorts of reasons. We could talk about it another time, but I think right now in our time today, it's precisely when we need to resuscitate those radical native, that's why our yeshiva is called traditionally radical, those native traditional mechanisms for change, because we really need them now. And we need queer and trans and people of color and people with disabilities and people with these disenfranchised identities and marginal experiences to say, I actually have a good idea for how we can fix it. You teach me how, and I'll tell you what we need to fix. You know, when you want to fix something, you don't get the people for whom the current version of it works just great. You want the people for whom the current version of it doesn't work, but who are committed to making it better. Those are the people you want at the table. We've been taking into rabbinical school the entirely wrong team of players. You know, we've been taking the Boy Scouts into rabbinical school. Let's get those kids that were in the youth group and in the Hillel and, you know, the ones who are like rah-rah, we don't need them. We need the ones who are pissed off and alienated and really know what needs fixing. Okay, I'll stop.
You know, first of all, what's going through my head is like from the rabbinic students I've met, like some of them are, they're all over the map, right? And so that's
now increasingly, thank God,
right.
increasingly, yeah. That is true.
But I want to talk about God, and specifically the idea that part of study is, they say it begins with Yirat Hashem. It begins with a kind of humility. And I think what we're saying here is, like, if you have too much humility, you don't feel like you can be in the room. There's a difference between humility and degradation. But I want to understand where God is in this room for you. And I understand that you can speak as the head of Svara, but I'm curious, where's God here?
Before I went to rabbinical school, I grew up in an Orthodox milieu. Went to an Orthodox Hebrew school. That was our shul. We were what Yitz Greenberg calls the unobservant Orthodox. It's like oddly observant Orthodox. We wouldn't think of driving to shul, but we ate ham, but we felt guilty about it. And at a certain point, I rejected, I rejected Judaism as I kind of came into myself as a woman, as a feminist, as a queer person. I spent a year in Japan and became a very devout Buddhist. I kind of fell in with a crowd of seekers, of expat seekers. And meditation was for me that spiritual practice that worked to help me become the kind of human being, a better human being. And I was on my way to becoming a monk, and I had one of those Rosenzweigian moments. Okay, I'll give Judaism one last shot. And I went to the rabbi in Tokyo, and I told him where I was, and he pulled this is Michael Shudrek, who's in Poland now. So it's really thanks to him that everything I've done, it's all thanks to him. So he pulled a volume off of his shelf and he gave it to me, and it was Pirkei Avot. And he totally fucked me up, because when I read Pirkei Avot, I thought, oh my God, the Jews are as smart as the Buddhists. And then I realized, okay, it just might be that, I'm a Jew for a reason. I better continue seeking God in my spiritual path in a Jewish way. At least I better give it a shot before going off and being a Buddhist. And I said, I'm going to give it 6 years. And that's why I went to rabbinical school. I did not go in order to become a professional. I went because I wanted to see if the Jewish path to God was really going to work as well as the Buddhist path. And I thought I might be a more whole human being if I do it that way. And I got to rabbinical school, and I fully expected prayer to be the analog to meditation. And to my surprise, I didn't find that experience in prayer. I found it in the Beit Midrash, in learning Talmud. And it was very profound, this experience. It was an experience of God. So when you ask me, where is God in all of this? For me, it's in the experience of learning. It is that sense of being fully present and 100% consumed and focused and deeply connected to another human being and to this text. That's the God experience. Some people call it flow. It feels like there's something about, right? So I think that's where the God is. The God is the experience of learning the way we do it, in the way people, that 1%, has had the opportunity to do it for 2,000 years. And what we pass off in adult ed or day schools as learning is really such weak tea in comparison. I think it's often. And at Svara, we only learn in the original, never, ever, ever in translation, always in Chavruta, and that facilitates that experience of God.
that experience of presentness and of surfacing something inside of me that I wasn't even aware of. You know, I think we walk around with these half formed insights and discernments that are just waiting to be completed. And when they're completed, you have insight, which you can use in your life. If that's what happens, right? I know you both know this. When you're learning with a chavruta and the text is opaque and you're trying to figure it out, lots of things come up and you make associations from what your chavruta says that may have nothing to do with the content of the text. That kind of experience of your molecules and the text molecules and your partner coming together, that for me, that's an experience of God. It's a creation experience of some sort. And it's addictive. I mean, I hate to make drug analogies, but it is like crack. I don't know, it's what people tell me, but it's just addictive. When you have that experience, you want more of it. And you know, learning communities are very powerful, sticky, thick, intimate places.
So let's suppose you succeed.
Yeah.
Let's bless you, Benay, with all the things, all the wishes of your hearts.
Yeah.
Of your heart, and you succeed. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And out of Svara, Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah. Out of Svara comes a new Torah.
Yeah.
Out of Svara comes a new understanding of, excuse me, of Judaism, of Torah. I want to know what that Torah demands of us. What are the mitzvot that the Torah of Svara is going to demand that the Torah of past generation didn't ask for, or didn't ask enough of, or didn't understand, or didn't grasp the way that your Svara has come to grasp it?
Well, first I should say that I'm not in retail. Okay, so the actual practices and, you know, like the rituals, the practices, the holidays, how we're going to do it is really not my forte. And what I am out to do is to get a new team on the field who will have, you know, more skill in the retail. But here's what I do know. Here's what I believe. I believe the entire Jewish enterprise was designed with one and only one purpose in mind. Its one goal is to create a certain kind of human being. A human being who is deeply empathic, connected to others, has a sense of responsibility to others, who can not only tolerate, but hold with excitement, paradox, complexity, uncertainty, right? Who is active rather than passive, who is challenging rather than compliant, who understands that the apparent is not all that's there, and so on. That kind of person is going to be able to suss out where are people suffering, where is their hurt, where are the conditions that are constraining everyone's ability to not only live, but thrive. And, you know, I think it's pretty obvious that some of the non-negotiable values in the next Jewish future are going to be anti-racism, feminism, queer normativity, and that's shorthand for, right, a lot of things. And it will recenter what has been sort of in the toolbox of that 1% and bring to lots and lots and lots of people the willingness, the mandate, the willingness, the sense of permission that our tradition gives us to radically change what Jewish looks like in order to create a system that does a better job than our current one of creating that kind of person who will naturally create that kind of world. So I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question.
It's hard to imagine the messianic times. So I'm
Yeah.
asking you for a messianic vision, which is just fine. It's good. It's actually the fact that you're more ambiguous about it makes me more comfortable. Thank you. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I feel like what I have my eye on where the ball needs to go next, and that is getting that new team on the field and bringing them into conversation with a tradition that has always been radical, that has always been courageous, that has always been willing to look outside and go, you know what, these people are suffering. I need the tradition to stop that. Women are suffering. We need the tradition to help them not suffer. And, you know, the Talmud records those courageous voices, you know, like Rava, who took the idea of Svara from, you know, a logical deduction and blew it up. Who say, yeah, I know you're all noticing, you know, women, for example, are suffering. It's not good enough to say, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, our hands are tied. That's not the way we can be in relationship with our tradition any longer. We have to do something about it. So I want those people in the field who have insight into who's suffering, because that's them, because they are them.
Well, I can tell you that both of us resonate with this. Noah, I know, if I can speak for you for a second, resonates because her father began teaching a tradition that had been buried for 200 years, and for a long time was the only voice teaching this whole treasure trove of mystical tradition. That's the world that you were raised in. And I was raised with Harold Schulweis, who demanded that the word conscience be reintroduced to the Jewish vocabulary.
Yeah, and I think what he was getting at Svara. That's what he was getting at. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. You do it. You do it beautifully. Thank you. I'm a Jewish man. I'm used to being interrupted. It's okay.
Wait, I want to add one more thing.
Go ahead.
You yourself, I remember learning from you the idea that the rabbis didn't have this pietistic relationship with Torah that we've come to have with it. This, oh my God, right? It's this thing that we can't touch. It's obvious when you read Talmud that they didn't have that kind of relationship with it. And we need to go back into that kind of, you know, power relationship with our tradition, that kind of audacious, empowered relationship.
I think it's magnificent. Go ahead. No, please.
I love this idea of widening the apertures, right? And the assumption that if we really believe God is everywhere, then we need to invite aspects of God to the table. Or it's not even invite, it's like, we're here. You know, what does the new us look like and feel like? And how is that a reflection of divinity for our time? And when we think about different reflections of divinity, watch this segue, we ask every one of our esteemed guests for an unlikely question. We ask for your favorite Jewish joke, not to equate the importance of the work of widening and bringing the players on the field. And I consider myself someone who might have not been invited. So I take that, I think it's very holy, and I take it very, very seriously. I don't want to equate that with humor, but at the same time, like accepting the parts of ourselves that are unpredictable, the joke parts is really important, right? It's dead serious.
I love that. I love that. Okay, well, first I want to say that I think you're absolutely right. And it's not an accident that at Svara we use a lot of humor, and we are kind of edgy and tongue-in-cheek, and we're very, very playful. Here, I have my wings on my desk. All of the Beit Midrash proctors are called fairies at Svara, and they all wear wings. So yeah, you gotta keep the humor and fun in it. So when I think about my favorite Jewish joke, really the first thing that comes to me is just punchlines. So I need to dredge up the actual joke, but okay. I think it's the story about the Jewish grandmother who is at the seaside with her little grandson. Of course, of course, as soon as I say the grandmother at the beach, exactly. So she's at the beach with her little grandson and he's sitting in the sand playing. And all of a sudden this gigantic wave comes in and washes him out to sea. And she's so distraught and she prays to God, please God, return my grandson. Oh my God, he's my entire life. Please help me return him safely. And with that, another gigantic wave comes and plants the little boy back on the sand, good as new. And the grandmother says, he had a hat. That's my favorite Jewish joke, at least of the day.
Outstanding. Outstanding.
He had a hat. Okay.
Benay Lappe, it has been a joy sharing your passion and your learning and your vision and a taste of your messianic aspirations. So thank you so very, very, very much. This has been a real joy. Thank you so very, very much.
Oh, it's such an honor. Thank you. Thank you both.
So Ed, what did you think? She's so alive.
Oh, it's remarkable. She's very remarkable. Look, I tend to cerebral expressions of Judaism, and I tend to be much more comfortable in a learning environment than I am in a praying environment. So I really appreciate what she's accomplished, and I appreciate the notion of learning as a form of spirituality. And I genuinely appreciate, and I'm betraying my own generational blinders here, and I genuinely appreciate this notion of bringing the queer eye, the queer sensibility to Torah, and recovering the idea that Torah, and especially Talmud, is a radical document created by people who were living on the periphery, on the margins, and trying to find a way to live that way with dignity and to find the moral sensibility that place in the world gives us. I mean, to dust off Talmud and make it something radical instead of an heirloom that sits on the shelf in the museum, I really appreciated her passion and her vision about that. What did you appreciate?
You know, I didn't get a chance, but I wanted to ask her about Buber, because I felt that she was really bringing his universalist and Jewish, distinctly Jewish sensibility to the idea of relationship. And if you can't trust that the other person across the table has something of God in them, or if you yourself feel you're being made to be devoid of God because of who you are, you can't be in the room. And so I think, you know, in the same way that we say we have to go back to the tradition and you know, take the time to take it apart and look for the Torah for this moment, you know, I'm thinking we have to look around us. You know, the living Torah of this moment is in the faces and the people around us. And if the rooms are too similar, we're splitting hairs. We're missing the real arguments of our time. That's really what moved me the most.
Let me ask you to reflect on things. One of the things you shared with her a remarkable experience of having created a new institutional expression of Jewish life. She's created Svara, which has become so powerful, a yeshiva model. You've created the kitchen. If I call it a synagogue, you'll never speak to me again. So it's a new institutional model.
No, we got to go clean on the record here. I grew up in shuls. I like synagogues. The word just doesn't mark it well out here. That's all it is.
But reflect with me for just a moment, because you share with her this amazing capacity to imagine and engineer and lead something brand new into the Jewish world. What did you hear in her experience? How does that reflect on your experience?
You know, sometimes people call us innovators, and I always say we're actually just translators. We're translating Torah for our time and place. And translation requires that you know what you're translating and who you're translating for. the one radical thing we did when we began the kitchen was, and this was based on really what I saw around me, is we said anyone who wants to do practice Judaism with sincerity and integrity can do so. Be on the board, you can say Kaddish, you can come up to the Torah. If you know how to read Torah, you could read Torah. No one's done it yet, but anyone who we wanted to move the boundaries away from who is, and asking questions of authenticity from the beginning to who is willing. And there I felt a real kinship with what the Svara project is about, of moving it away from being gatekeepers towards, okay, what's inside? Who's willing to show up? I think the program is actually quite demanding from what I know of it also. They're not messing around.
Well, this has been a wonderful evening of exploration. So thank you so very, very much.
It's such a pleasure.
And to everyone who's watching, thank you for sharing our journey through this new expressions of Jewish life. Join us next week.